First of all, thank you for your patience as we sort through the many technical issues involved in creating a modern presentation for you. First of all, I have to apologize for those of you who are hoping to see Peter Merholtz up here today. Peter was unable to make it, so I have stepped in his place. The presentation is the same, only the name has changed. My name is Jesse James Garrett. I am co-founder and president of a company called Adaptive Path. And if my name is familiar to you, there might be a few different reasons for that. The first of those reasons is this thing. This is a document that I created way back in the year 2000 to talk about user experience as it relates to web product development. I developed this as a tool in my work as a user experience designer to help communicate with business people and with technology people about just what it is I did in my job every day and how that related to delivering on the mission for a product. I developed this tool. I found this to be useful in communicating to people about the work that we do. I put it up on the web, and a funny thing happened. It started popping up all over the place. And it has become sort of this staple of cubicle art for web designers. This thing became so popular that a publisher got in touch with me and asked me to turn it into a book. That book is also called The Elements of User Experience, and it has become a popular thing in its own right. It's a very short book with lots of illustrations. In other words, designed exactly for bosses to read. Another reason that you might know my name is that if you create diagrams like this one, or you work with people who do for user experience on websites, chances are that those diagrams were created with some variation of a system that I developed called the visual vocabulary for documenting the user experience of a product so that that user experience can then be communicated to development teams. Or you might know my name because of my company, Adaptive Path. The work that we do, some people say is a little bit difficult to describe. I think it's pretty simple, actually. We call what we do product strategy and experience design. And what we mean by that simply is that we figure out what people want, and then we design and define products for them. And we've done this kind of work for a lot of different companies out there. Some of the more kind of cutting-edge organizations that you might have heard of, like Blogger or Flickr or BitTorrent. But we've done this work for other kinds of companies as well, great big companies like Intel and Microsoft and even the United Nations. Another project of ours that we didn't do for a client was something that we created on our own, a product called MeasureMap, which is an analytical tool for bloggers to help bloggers understand their audience better and understand how people are using their blogs. We really didn't get very far with the development of this before it was snatched up by our friends at Google. And blogs and blogging have kind of an interesting history with us at Adaptive Path. It has really been part of our culture since we started. In fact, Peter Merholtz, who was going to give the presentation here today, is actually the person you can blame for that word blog itself. But the word blog isn't the word that got Adaptive Path so much recognition in the last couple of years, or got us into Wired magazine. That word was my coinage, Ajax. This trend has kind of led some people to comment that Adaptive Path's primary business is four-letter words. But people have asked me this question about how it is that we find ourselves in the position of coming up with new words for things. And I think it really has to do with the nature of our work as experience designers. Especially experience designers for technology products are dealing with this fundamental challenge of the collision between the old ways of doing things and the new ways of doing things. And it's in this space where really well kind of entrenched human behaviors and cultural traditions collide with new technologies that these new ideas for concepts that don't have names yet, really come about. Now, this collision between old ways and new technologies is really, really apparent when you look at the current trend of the so-called Web 2.0 applications, and there are a lot of them out there. Now, looking at something like this, you might think that all you need to do to have a Web 2.0 product is to have a brightly colored logo and a funny name. But there's more to it than that, because I think that the set of trends that have been identified as Web 2.0 really represent an important stage in the evolution of the web as a medium, because I think that we are really starting to get a handle on the answer to this question. What is the web good for? Or what is the web good at? What are the aspects of the web as a medium that are unique to that medium, that carry a power unlike that we've seen in any other medium? And so I think that where we are right now is the point, similar to the point in the evolution of a medium like television, for example. Now, television, when they first started out, didn't really know what it was. It was a new set of technologies, but they didn't really know what it was good for. So they took a few different kinds of approaches. They looked at radio as a model for how to create television. They looked at theater as a model. And after about 10 years of that kind of experimentation, we started to figure out what was unique about television, what made television special and different from any of the media that had come before. And we're at a similar stage now, about 10 years into the evolution of the web, of coming to terms with these same kinds of issues. And some of those are issues like these. The idea that the web is a platform, that it's a great big web out there, and is not just a delivery channel for products, but it's something more. That it's not that the web is a feature of your product, but your product is a feature of the web. That every product contributes to the collective strength of the web as a medium. We see this playing out in the current trend for open APIs, providing interoperability among web applications. One of the best examples of this out there is Flickr and what Flickr has done. In recognizing their place as part of the larger web and the need to interoperate with a wide variety of other services, they've established opportunities for other people to connect into their service, to provide ways for desktop software and camera phones to get photographs into Flickr, ways to get photos out of Flickr using a variety of different web-based and publishing tools. Now there are companies that have built entire businesses simply on allowing you to get physical copies of the photographs you find on Flickr. And now that Flickr is part of Yahoo, there are all kinds of opportunities for interoperability with Yahoo's other websites. Some people say, well, what's really going on with Web 2.0 is this transition in the way that we think about the web, moving away from the page metaphor. Instead of thinking about websites, thinking of our products as web applications with interfaces. All of the kind of the metaphorical conventions of the browser start to become obsolete. My favorite example of this kind of thing in action is this site. This is Kayak. Kayak is a price comparison tool for airline tickets. And one of the really interesting things about it is the way that it leverages the openness of the web to deliver value to users. The way that it gathers all of this data from all of these different airline websites and presents it all in a single place, because none of the airlines are going to do that for you, right? But not only do they do that, they extend that by really getting away from the whole concept of web pages altogether. So you put in a search for a flight, it goes out and gathers all of that information from all the various airline websites, and now it provides you with a single interface within which you can manipulate that data without having to go back to the server, without having to wait for page after page after page to load. You can use these different checkboxes and controls over here on the left-hand side and manipulate the results that you've gotten from your search to refine it to find exactly what you're looking for. And it updates it dynamically within the page. Of course, the biggest thing that people talk about when they talk about Web 2.0 applications is the idea of products that get better with use. Products where the value doesn't just come from the people who created the product, but the value comes from the people who use the product. Consider this example. What would YouTube be without its users? It wouldn't really be much of anything. It's just an empty vessel. Provide ways for people to contribute value and connect people with each other. This is one of the more famous YouTube videos. This is a rock band called OK Go. And OK Go is, they're a relatively young band, and so as a result, they went to their record company and asked for some money to make a music video, and the record company said, no, sorry. We are too busy spending money on videos for our big stars, and we can't give you any money for a video. So they said, okay, we'll make our own. They got some treadmills, pulled them together into a room, and did some dancing around on the treadmills and posted the video on YouTube. This video, not only did it find an audience there, it brought the band in front of a wider audience than they probably even could have found by getting the video played on MTV. This video then won the Grammy Award last year for the best music video of the year. And all of that because YouTube simply provided a way, a means, for them to contribute value. Then we have the matter of delivering rich experiences. You know, it's funny, if you think about it, if you've taken screenshots of people's computer screens, what they've done, what they were doing at any given moment over time, go back 10 years, go back 20 years, what you would have seen is mostly a whole lot of gray, right? First we had white type on black screens, and then we had Windows with its fields of gray toolbars and taskbars and menu bars. But the web came along and showed us that we can have applications with a little bit more visual impact than that. The trouble with web applications is that the trade-off for that visual impact was this real kind of poverty of interaction, that the interactions that you could have with a web application were extremely limited, basically interacting with a few form fields and then waiting for the server to respond to whatever action you had taken. But now we're starting to see web technology maturing and this turning into something more. And this is where I come into the story with the concept of AJAX. Now, since I started writing about AJAX a couple of years ago, I've heard from a lot of people about all of the different meanings of that term. In ancient Greek mythology, Ajax was the second mightiest warrior. This is an illustration from a Grecian urn of Ajax coming home from the Trojan War carrying the body of Greece's mightiest warrior, Achilles, over his shoulder. Ajax was a kind of missile back in the Cold War era. And actually, almost immediately after I started writing about Ajax, I heard from a lot of fans of the Amsterdam soccer team, which is called Ajax. So when I went to the Netherlands to give a talk about Ajax, of course, I had to wear the jersey to please the locals. Although what the people in Amsterdam told me was that if I was going to be traveling to Rotterdam, don't do that joke there. It would not go over very well. The rivalry there is especially fierce. And as you might imagine, I've heard more jokes about kitchen cleaner than you can possibly count. So in telling to people about Ajax, everybody wants to talk about the technology, all the different technologies that are involved in making this happen. And I get email from people all the time saying, well, if I use this and this and this together, does that make it Ajax? Or what if I want to use this instead of that? Does that now make it not Ajax? To my mind, this is not really what it's about. Because that's not what captured people's imagination about Ajax. It's not about the specific technologies. What it's about are really these two simple concepts. The asynchronous interaction model, breaking that page metaphor, moving away from the old sort of call and response interaction that we used to have with web applications, separating the user's interaction from the communication that the client has with the server. And then accomplishing this through browser-native technologies. It used to be, a few years ago that if you wanted to deliver a rich experience in a web browser, that would come with all sorts of conditions. The answer would be, yes, you can do that if the user has the right plugin, or if the user is running IE 6 on Windows XP with Service Pack 2 installed. If they met all of those conditions, then yes, you could do it. By using browser-native technologies, all kinds of possibilities open up to us to be able to reach a wide audience with no conditions and no compromises. My favorite description of Ajax, kind of metaphor for Ajax that I read, came from a guy named Bruce Sterling. Bruce Sterling is he's a science fiction writer, but he's also a kind of a technology pundit. And the way that he described Ajax was that it was roller skates for the web. Because of this decoupling of user behavior and server communications, he said, we used to move along the ground taking one step at a time, but now we've inserted between ourselves and the ground a set of constantly spinning wheels. But the funny thing about roller skates as a metaphor is that roller skates aren't always the safest mode of transportation, right? If you don't know what you're doing, you could hurt yourself, or you could hurt other people. And that's kind of where we are right now with Ajax applications. We're seeing a lot of different approaches and a lot of people trying things out that maybe they work and maybe they don't work so well. And what everybody's really trying to replicate is the great success of Google Maps. People looked at Google Maps and it opened their eyes to the possibilities of what we can do in delivering rich experiences on the web. If you'd asked somebody a couple of years ago if there was any room for innovation in a web-based map application, they would have said, no, probably not. That was a problem that we solved. We solved that problem around 1997, 1998, and those sites were about as good as they could be. And the remarkable thing about Google Maps, what caught everyone's imagination, was that it showed them that the web could be so much more. So for a lot of people, the story of delivering rich experiences really starts with Google Maps. But I don't think that's quite right. This is a story that actually goes back further than this. It might go back a bit further than you are imagining. The year is 1886. The Scientific American magazine published a front-page article hailing a new photographic apparatus. This was leading-edge, brand-new technology. It's going to transform the field. They called it the most practical of systems for the itinerant photographer. And here is all you need to do to use it. And all of these letters corresponding to the different parts in the diagram show you've got at least 19 different elements that the user has to keep track of in order to take a photograph. But the most practical of systems, a great leap forward in technology. But something happened. This camera did not become the camera that transformed photography. And that's because this guy had a different idea. This is a fellow named George Eastman. And around the time that that article was published in the Scientific American, he came up with a new technological approach. He invented a new kind of film. Instead of coming on plates, this film came on a single continuous roll. And he recognized that his invention, film that comes on a roll, opened up new possibilities for the experience that people could have with photography. And he described that experience this way: you press the button, we do the rest. Not 19 different parts to keep track of, but very, very simple. And so he took that concept and carried it through into the design and the development of a product that ended up transforming its industry. By simplifying that 19-step experience down to just 1, 2, 3. You press the button, and the ingenuity of George Eastman and the Eastman Kodak Company does the rest. Kodak might be one of the very first examples of somebody deciding, marketing coming along and deciding that a new technology needed to be branded in some way. But as a result of that, we have now the entire history of photography can really be divided into these two eras, before Kodak and then after. Kodak turned what was previously the domain of professionals or really dedicated hobbyists into a broad consumer technology. Of course, all of us who create products would love to be part of that kind of success story. So the question is, how do we get there? I think really the question we have to ask ourselves is, what's the highest compliment? What's the best thing that somebody can say about a product that we created? Do we want them to say something like this? Well, this thing really must make a lot of money. Or do we want them to say something like this? It hardly ever breaks. Or do we want them to say something like this? I can't live without it. New technologies intersecting with old ways of doing things and transforming people's lives. How do you do that? Isn't that really what we're after? This guy seems to know something about creating products that people can't live without. This is Apple CEO Steve Jobs. And this is, I'm going to read you a quote from an interview where he was asked, what's the magic formula for creating great technology products? And here's the first part of his answer. He says, when you start looking at a problem and it seems really simple, with all these simple solutions, you don't really understand the complexity of the problem. And your solutions are way too oversimplified, and they don't work. What he's describing here is a classic scenario of a technology company relying on technology itself as the means of delivering value to users. We see this most often early on in the development of a product category. Consider this product. Anybody recognize this? This is WordStar. Once upon a time, this was the world's most popular word processing application. Now to us, it's not much to look at, is it? A lot of gray. A little clunky, a little hard to use. But for WordStar's users, whose alternative was this, that new technology delivered a lot of value. Way back in the 1700s, this guy, this is the Englishman Samuel Johnson, he described it this way: like a dog's walking on his hind legs, it is not done well, but you are surprised to find it done at all. We can imagine a similar kind of reception to the early VCRs. Not much to look at. Bulky, noisy, kind of hard to use. But then something happened. Let's go back to Steve Jobs and the second part of his answer to the question of what it takes to create great technology products. He says, then you get into the problem, and you see it's really complicated, and you come up with all these convoluted solutions. That's sort of the middle, and that's where most people stop. And the solutions tend to work for a while. What he's describing here is an approach to product development where we move beyond technology as the means of delivering value to users, and instead we rely on features. But if you take this approach to its logical conclusion, what you get is something like this. Here's Microsoft Word with all the toolbars turned on. Now think about the message that this sends as the design of a product. The message that this sends is that, hey, word processing is complicated. We can't solve the problem. All we can do is pile more and more and more features on. And we're going to offload the problem of managing the complexity of word processing onto the user. The user is going to have to sort out which features do what, and the user is going to have to figure out how those features need to fit together in order to solve their problem. We saw something similar happen with the evolution of the VCR. Here's what VCRs look like these days. Much, much more complicated than those early ones. And look at all the stuff it does. On and on and on and on. So many features, and yet still, no one seems to know how to set the clock. The blinking 12 o'clock has become this kind of iconic example of a feature intended to deliver value to users that never does, because nobody can figure out how to use it. Let's see if Steve Jobs knows the solution. He says, the really great person will keep on going and find the key underlying principle of the problem and come up with a beautiful, elegant solution that works. A beautiful, elegant solution that works. That sounds like the kind of thing Steve Jobs would say, right? Maybe talking about the iPhone or the iPod. But the interesting thing to me is that this Steve Jobs wasn't the guy who said it. The guy who said it was this guy, all the way back in 1984. So this is actually not about technology at all. What we're talking about is a shift in our mindset about how we approach product development. Looking beyond technology as the way we deliver value to users, looking beyond features to deliver value to users through the experience that our product delivers. VCRs aren't too common these days. They've kind of become an obsolete technology. Now, one of the reasons for that is the rise of DVD for pre-recorded media. But another reason for that is that for the VCR's other use, is to be able to record television on your own and watch it later. New technologies have come into play. New technologies have filled the gap. This is the age of TiVo. And I think that it's important to remember that TiVo had a choice when they were designing this product. They could have chosen to take the VCR experience and say the VCR experience is exactly what consumers are used to, it's exactly what consumers want. And what we'll do is we'll just replace the technology involved. We'll pull the tape drive out of the VCR, replace it with a hard drive, and sell that to users. But they didn't do that. They did something different. They recognized that the introduction of digital technology to recording and playing back television created new opportunities to transform the experience that people had, similar to the way that the introduction of roll film presented the opportunity to transform the experience of photography. Does anybody know what this product is? Anybody recognize this? This is the Diamond Rio PMP300. This was the first widely available digital music player. And when this product came along, everybody was excited. This was going to be big. Had the right technology, it had the right features. The record industry was so sure that this was going to be the transformative product. They went to court and they asked the federal government to have this specific product, the Rio PMP300, banned in the United States. It's funny to think about, especially because that transformation that they were expecting didn't happen. Well, it did happen, but it didn't happen as a result of the PMP300, did it? Now, the product that brought that about was this one. It's funny now to recognize the level of skepticism that greeted the introduction of the iPod. It was more expensive than the competition. It actually had fewer features, yet somehow became the dominant product in the marketplace. How can that be? Well, I think that one reason for it is that the iPod, as a product, recognizes something fundamental about the way that people interact with technology. Specifically, there's a lot of psychological research out there right now that shows that when people interact with technology products, it's not like the way that they use other kinds of products. The cognitive mechanisms that are employed are very different when you use a technology product versus using something like a hammer or a saw. When you interact with a technology product, you're using the same structures in your brain that you use when you are in a social situation. In other words, psychologically, we respond to technology products as if they were people. There was one study that was done where they had users sit down in front of a computer and use a piece of software. And then afterward, they were asked to evaluate their experience using the software. And one group performed the evaluation using the same computer that they had been sitting in front of. Another group moved to a different computer to perform the evaluation. And what we found, not we, but what they found was that the people who moved to a different computer to evaluate the software were more critical in their judgments. They were harsher. And the conclusion that the researchers reached after the study was that the people who were sitting in front of the same machine that they'd been using to use the software didn't want to hurt the computer's feelings. The product is a person to us. We see this in some of the press coverage of the iPod phenomenon, these anecdotal stories about the way that people respond to this product. Like the story of the 12-year-old girl who, the first day that she had her iPod, before she went to bed, kissed it goodnight. And you can say, well, you know, that's a 12-year-old girl. But that still doesn't explain the grown-up who, when their iPod broke and had to be replaced, went out and bought a new one, but then couldn't take it out of the box for 2 days because it meant they would have to say goodbye to their old friend. They would have to say goodbye to that broken hunk of metal and plastic. It's a powerful emotional connection that we have with products that we interact with. This is an iPod case called iGuy. It makes physical this psychological attachment that we have to interactive products. Now, in the case of TiVo, they couldn't give their product arms and legs because it has to sit on a shelf with other audio-video components. So they anthropomorphized the logo instead. By recognizing this psychological dimension to product design, we can create products that people will have this kind of emotional resonance with. People connect with products that know who they are. People connect with products that display a consistent integrity, a personality to their behavior. We run into trouble in making that integrity possible in a lot of cases because of the way that we approach the product development process. The model that a lot of people apply when they talk about technology products is this one, where you start with this kind of core of data, and then around that you wrap some business logic to process and manipulate the data. And then around that, you wrap the outer shell of the user interface. In fact, shell is a term that technologists use to describe user interfaces, right? The trouble is that the model that users have in mind isn't this one. The user's model is more like this. There's the user interface, and the rest of it is magic. They don't understand how all that other stuff works. They don't really care. All that matters to them is the experience that the product delivers. But when our product development processes are driven in this way, by being driven by the underlying technological choices that we have to make, and saving the user experience for this outer wrapper that we're going to add at the end, it's hard to deliver something that has a personality. It's hard to deliver something that has a behavioral integrity to it. And this, again, is one of the things that is really changing in the industry. What we're seeing more and more are product development teams that are coming at it from the other direction, starting with the concept of the experience that they want the product to deliver, and making their choices about the underlying technologies, the underlying architecture, based on that. Tim O'Reilly is probably the most prominent observer of the industry right now. When he first spotted this trend, he described it as designing from the outside in. One tool that we've kind of identified as really the way that you make this happen in the product development process is the concept of experience strategy. Going all the way back to George Eastman, if you think about this phrase, you press the button, we do the rest. He started as a technologist. He invented a kind of film. But his strategy isn't about a kind of film. His strategy is about the experience that he wants his product to deliver to his audience. With that in mind, he can use the technology, he can make choices about the technology throughout the development process. This is a star for him to sail his ship by. A touchstone throughout the development process. So we can choose the technological approaches that align with the experience that we want to deliver. We see this approach out there a lot among the Web 2.0 applications these days. One good example of that is Google Calendar. Google Calendar, now you would think of Google as being this really sort of technology-driven organization. But Google Calendar didn't start with technology. Google Calendar, at the very beginning of their product development process, They started with this set of bullets, a vision for the experience that the product would deliver. This was presented at a recent conference by the product manager for Google Calendar. Fast, visually appealing, joyous to use. Drop dead simple. With this strategy in mind, clearly communicated out to the development team, they could make strategic choices, because there are always trade-offs throughout product development. They can make strategic choices about where the technology would reinforce that strategy. And for Google Calendar, this has really paid off. By having that touchstone throughout the development process, they've been able to find a great deal of success in a very short period of time. This is traffic data for the first 9 months of Google Calendar's existence, compared against the two leading calendars from Yahoo and Microsoft. And what we see in those first 9 months is we see Google Calendar going up and up and up, and the leaders very steadily eroding until Google Calendar finally actually overtakes the number 2 and is well on its way to becoming number 1. Now you can look at that, something like that vision statement, and say, well, aren't we really talking about the brand? The Google brand is about being fast, visually appealing, joyous to use, right? But there's something else going on here. It's not about identifying your brand attributes and building those brand attributes into the design. Because a brand-driven approach starts with a company's vision of itself and projects that vision outward toward its audience. When you take an experience-driven approach, you start with the audience, an understanding of the experience that you want the audience to have, and work backward to identifying the underlying technological systems that you need to have in place in order to deliver that experience. I want to share an example of this in action from a recent project that we did at Adaptive Path. We're a consulting firm. We work with big companies. We work with little ones. This was a big company. We were working with a financial services firm. They asked us to help them redesign their website for their customers. So all kinds of things that you can do on this website: manage your accounts and do transactions and stock trading and all kinds of things like that. In order to really understand how the design needed to evolve, they sent us around the country to sit with people in their homes and have them kind of show us how they manage their finances, so we could see how the website fit into it. And the challenge with this is that we saw lots of different kinds of things. People with all these different organization systems for the various documents that they used. Some people who, so this one screen here at the top is somebody who had hung on to their DOS PC just in order to be able to keep that same set of Lotus spreadsheets up to date that they'd been using all these years. So out of this experience, going out and sitting with people as they talked us through the process of managing their finances, we identified some kind of high-level design requirements. And it became more and more apparent that there were really these common themes that were coming up over and over again about what people really needed a product to be in order for them to be able to use it successfully. And having arrived at this set of strategic design requirements, we use this throughout the design process. Simple, service-oriented, supportive, assistive, helpful, clear. These concepts were carried through. We were able to even take a step back, because before we went and talked to the users, we had to first understand what the business problem was that our client was facing. And so we'd identified all the different kinds of business value that we can deliver through the application. And then we combined these kind of business metrics with our design strategies and really identified it as a set of opportunities to use the design to deliver value for our client as well as value for the users, put those together, and we arrived at a set of experience strategies. Now we're getting down to a more concrete level, but we're still not talking about technology, not talking about specific aspects of the design. These experience strategies, again, provided that guidepost for us throughout the process, so that when we got down into the details of designing specific page elements, we could connect the design choices that we made at that detailed level back to the experience strategies, so that we could make sure that everything that we were doing was aligned with the overall direction that the product needed to go. One of the funny things about going out and doing user research is that you sometimes end up getting answers to questions that you didn't expect. And we definitely found that in this case because of, you remember all of those different things that people pulled out to show us how they were managing their finances. And the website was really just one part of it. There were all of these different components that our client was delivering to their customers. And the way that they were coordinating these different components was through their brand guidelines. The idea being that if all of the components were aligned with the brand, they were therefore successful. But we didn't really find that was the case at all. In order for our client to be really successful, they had to be able to leverage the overall system that they had created. Again, this goes all the way back to Kodak. This camera is actually the first of those little kind of mail-in cameras that you see in drugstores now. The camera came preloaded with film, and then if you wanted to get prints of those photos, when you used up the roll, you send the camera back to Kodak, and they would send you back prints of your photographs and a reloaded camera, so you could take some more. With this, they had not just a product, but now they had an entire system. They could keep the product experience focused on that one piece, pressing the button. And back at the factory, all of the rest of the complexity of photography in the late 1800s was handled by them. Here is another example of where the iPod really distinguishes itself, because if you look at the iPod as a product, it doesn't actually do that much, right? It really just does a few things. But really, the success of the iPod is because it's not just a product. There's more to it, because in addition to the iPod, you have iTunes, the desktop software that comes with it. And so a lot of that complexity of managing digital media can be offloaded from the portable device to the desktop environment, where these tasks are more easily accomplished. And then with the introduction of the iTunes Music Store, now they've extended it even further, creating an end-to-end solution. The portable device to be able to play your media, the desktop software in order to be able to manage it, and the service in order to be able to acquire it, together form an entire system, all of the pieces of which acknowledge the existence of the others. Here's another example of this systems thinking at work. Now, there are many, many people out there who, when you open their medicine cabinet, you see something like this. This row of identical orange pill bottles. It's not surprising that the latest statistics are that 60% of people who are on some kind of prescription medication have taken the wrong one at some point. This is a designer named Deborah Adler, and she saw this problem in a very direct and personal way.
my grandmother happened to accidentally take my grandfather's medication. They were both prescribed the same drug, but just different dosage strengths. She took his medication by accident, and when I looked inside their medicine cabinet, I wasn't at all surprised that the error occurred. The problem was that the medication bottles looked practically identical. The only difference was their first names, which, by the way, start with the same two letters, H and E, and the dosage strengths.
She looked at this and she decided that there was a better way to do this, that there was a way to avoid this problem. And her solution eventually became something called ClearRx, which is the Target pharmacy system in Target stores, and got a lot of attention when this thing came along. So these bottles are radically different from conventional prescription bottles. But this wasn't just a magic one stroke and the entire problem was solved. There were a lot of different pieces that had to go into creating the bottle, because the bottle is just one part of it. The bottle actually has to be part of this overall system in the Target pharmacies in order to work. Here's Deborah Adler talking again about the challenges of working with this system.
It was an enormous undertaking, and I should stress that I did not work in a tunnel at all. It was a huge
Or not.
effort. I worked with pharmacy teams.
Here's what she says. She says, it was an enormous undertaking. It was a huge collaborative effort. I worked with the pharmacy team, pharmacy operations, the Target technology team to build the software to accommodate the new labeling system, the marketing team. There were major training sessions to train all the pharmacists on how to use this new system, because they were the most important people to us. They were the front line. They had to explain how to use this new system, and they had to learn how to use it. There was a bit of a learning curve involved. So all of this complexity in putting this system together to deliver that end result experience to users. How did they manage it? At the very beginning of the process, she identified a set of experiential requirements that they would need in order to succeed. Easy to read, clear instructions, additional information at hand. Now, for each of these experiential requirements, she could have just come up with a solution to each one, and that would have been pretty good. But instead, she synthesized these, because all of the pieces have to work together to create a single unified experience, into a prototype solution. This was her prototype. Now, through this prototyping process, they were able to evaluate all of the different trade-offs that went into creating this system. This experience strategy was that star for them through the process to allow them to manage those trade-offs. Here's one example of a challenge that they faced. Something fundamental to the design of the bottle is this color coding system that's used. But when they looked at the prototype, they realized that they would have to put color printers in every pharmacy. It's a very expensive proposition for a chain like Target with thousands of outlets. Color printers are too expensive. Color coding is helpful. So what if we did something completely different? Instead, they replaced the color labels with plastic rings of different colors. The great thing about these rings is that they were durable, they could be reused, but they didn't carry nearly the expense that the printers would have. So again, with the experience strategy to draw from, they were able to make intelligent choices about these trade-offs, so that when they made those choices, they made them in the interest of the experience that they were trying to deliver to users, rather than saying, oh, we can't afford it, it's too expensive, we'll have to drop that feature. Now, photography has changed quite a bit since George Eastman's day. There's a lot of complexity, even now. You've got digital cameras. You've got desktop software for managing photographs. You've got the other digital cameras. You've got the need to get prints of digital photographs, the desire to publish them to the web. All of these different aspects to what it takes to do digital photography these days. It's not a neat, self-contained system the way that the Target Pharmacy system is, or Apple's iPod iTunes system is. But you can still benefit from taking a systems view to this, and this is exactly what they've done at Flickr. Flickr, as a product, has found a place for itself within the larger system of digital photography. And the reason for that is that Flickr is driven by an explicit experience strategy, and theirs is right here on the About page. Here's what they say about their product. We want to help people make their photos available to the people who matter to them. To do this, we want to get photos into and out of the system in as many ways as we can. Flickr is the WD-40 that makes it easy to get photos from one person to another in whatever way they want. We want to enable new ways of organizing photos. Part of the solution is to make the process of organizing photos collaborative. They're not talking about technology at all. They're not talking about the specific features of their product. What they're talking about is a vision for the experience that has guided them throughout the development process. So with this experience strategy in mind, we can look at the way that Flickr interoperates with all of these other components and see something larger at work. We can see the way that they've acknowledged their place in this larger system, a system that they don't control. And this is the challenge for our financial services client now. How do they take these products that were designed as individual products and stitch them together into an overarching experience for their customers? How do they apply the lessons of Flickr and Kodak and Google Calendar and the Target Pharmacy and the iPod and acknowledge that the experience is the product that they deliver and the real source of value for their users? Thank you very much for your attention. We have about 10 minutes before the break. I think there's a microphone in the aisle if there are any questions.
I'm really loud.
Okay.
I'll just be loud.
All right.
Can you talk a little bit about how do you iterate that experience strategy as technology changes and makes impact? How do you stay on that star? I mean, Kodak is a perfect example, right? Even though they weren't doing experience strategy, they didn't know they were doing experience strategy. But of course, technology changed their entire, that entire experience, didn't make it as relevant anymore. So I'm curious about how you iterate on that.
Right. So the question is, how do you iterate an experience strategy as new technologies come along? How do you make sure that you don't lose sight of that star? Well, you know, Kodak is a really interesting example because you're absolutely right. They lost their way. They forgot what business they were in. They literally thought they were in the photochemical business. They didn't acknowledge that they were in the business of delivering, image, the ability to capture images from people's lives for them, right? And if they had taken that approach, then they wouldn't have gotten so blindsided as they were by digital photography. If anything, they would have invented digital photography. So I think that you always want to be looking at the experience strategy from the perspective of what's the timeless thing here? What's the thing that's about the people and the experience that they want to have that's never going to change? If your experience strategy is at a detail level where it's reliant on the existence of certain technologies, then you need to kind of bring it up to the human level.
There's been there seems to be competition between Ajax and Flash and Amicable
Well, the project, the term Ajax actually came out of a consulting project that I worked on, and it was a project where, at the experience strategy level, what we recognized was that responsiveness, the responsiveness of the application was going to be a critical competitive advantage for our client. And so, so we decided that a traditional web application was not going to satisfy that requirement. We initially were looking at Flash as a possibility, but the challenge for our client was that they had a user base that had really diverse technologies at their disposal. We did the user research. It was another one of these things where we went around the country and sat with people as they did their work. And there was one guy who was using, I think it actually was a Pentium, period. A Pentium computer to do his work. And not a Pentium 2, not a Pentium 3, a Pentium. And so, so asking this guy to use anything that was going to be processor intensive on the client side was a challenge. Additionally, asking the client to build competency in Flash development was also going to be too much. But they had people who knew JavaScript. They were already doing some JavaScript stuff. So this was an easier step for them to take. So, you know, I think that to some extent you have to be absolutely practical about what are the competencies that we have, what are the resources that we can leverage, and what's our client base's what's their comfort level with these technologies, because you're going to see a really radically different approaches from audience to audience. I'm really curious about the Silverlight stuff. To what extent how true it really is going to be that it's going to be that seamless an experience for people to get the runtime up and running on the client side. That I think could potentially really shake things up. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops.
Jesse, it's Carrie Bodine.
Oh, hi, Carrie. How are you?
I was just wondering, when your clients come to you, do they know that they need user experience strategy help? Or do they come thinking that they just want you to build some features? And how do you get them to start thinking about user experience as a strategy?
That's no, they don't. They don't generally understand that that's what they need. The example that I showed from the financial services company is a really good one. In that we brought them back some things that they were maybe not quite ready to hear. But I think that the more you can articulate the experience strategy in explicit terms, the easier it is for them to recognize that this is something that has long-term value, that it's not just about the next release, where a feature discussion or a technology discussion or even a design discussion is going to be kind of time-bounded in that way. But by emphasizing that what you've got is something that is going to have a longer lifespan because it's about human behavior and it's about human psychology, stuff that doesn't change on the timeline of technology and design trends, that is usually the kind of thing that gets people's attention. Right.
How do you break through that?
Well, I think that there are a couple of aspects of it. One is fundamentally about kind of the tools that we use to do our work, right? And so one thing in this, I wonder if I can actually pull up that. that slide. One thing about this is the explicit connection of the design elements to the overarching strategy is something from a workflow perspective that you can show people and show them why something matters. Which, this is not part of your typical documentation, is that kind of correlation back to strategic objectives. The other part of it is really is kind of psychological, that there is nothing more compelling to people than video of users. If you can show them someone trying to use their product and show the reaction that the product gets, as much as they think they empathize with the user, or as much as they think they understand what the user is going through, that creates something. Again, I think it has to do with those cognitive mechanisms that are in place when you actually see a person trying to use it, as opposed to reading a report or something like that, that really gets people fired up. So it's kind of these evangelical tools that we use in addition to the practical kind of workflow stuff. Where do personas fit in? So I'm hoping that everybody here knows something about personas. Personas are user behavior profiles. They're essentially these fictional characters that we create to embody user needs through the design process. I think that where personas come into play is kind of at that level between the experience strategy and the specifics of the design. You see different aspects of the experience strategies. They start to take on different qualities when you look at them through the filter of a particular behavioral profile. So it's another one of these things that you can kind of link up in the chain to connect the strategy with the design. The persona falls somewhere in the middle there. I think that I'm out of time, but thank you all again.